last session for our decoding talk on the non-residential certificate of compliance forms, the dynamic forms, which are the only forms allowed prescriptively and for the performance options for non-residential, hotel, motel, and high-rise residential in this code cycle. Otherwise, people will be using the performance approach. We are recording the session. We record all of our sessions, and we take the best of the four. We're all hoping this fourth one will be it, and put it on our website. So Dale was just telling us about how he had some people in the office who might not be able to attend today. This will be up on our website in about 3 to 4 weeks for other people to view at their leisure as a recording. On our website, we have our last couple of decoding talks we've done on this current 2019 code that you might be interested in. Our last sessions were on how to use Energy Pro, which is one of the third-party software choices for the performance method, how to use Energy Pro to just model. We just really highlighted what's new for the 2019 code. One session for residential and one session for non-residential. We also did that for a series about just what's new for this code cycle. We have one just for residential and one for non-residential. And for those of you who might be unaware, we have a new occupancy that is subject to the energy code in this 2019 code cycle, licensed health care facilities, occupancy I-2. And we have a session in which we just talked about how those licensed health care facilities are going to look and feel, showing compliance to the energy code. We are brought to you by Energy Code ACE. We are funded by you, the ratepayers of California, so thank you very much. And we are administered by the investor-owned utilities, and we are under the auspices of the California Public Utilities Commission. My name is Gina Rodda, and I am the host for the Decoding Talk series, and apparently Daryl knows me from previous things in which he already knows that I actually was a music major in college. You, too, can get a music degree and still make a living. My parents still can't believe it. And I was lucky enough to get hired pretty much right out of college by a mechanical engineering firm in which the owner always resented the fact that his parents wouldn't let him get a music degree. They made him get an engineering degree. So he decided to hire me and pretty much teach me everything I know about the energy code and mechanical design on the job. And that's when I started my very first energy code cycle in 1991. And have been through quite a few code cycles over the years. Sally is my guest speaker. She and I have done a few of these together. Sally, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey everybody, I'm Sally. I work for a company called NORESCO, and I also focus on the energy code primarily in California and do a lot of work with Gina and the Energy Code ACE team to help market actors basically implement their part in the compliance process. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys today. Gina and I have both been supporting the California Energy Commission on these non-residential certificates of compliance. So we look forward to sharing what we know with you.
And we're going to tell you right up front, Sally and I love these forms. We think they're one of the best things that happen.
Disclose it.
Yes. That we think it's one of the best things that's happened to help people understand what truly is a compliant design, because I think that might have been a little lacking previously with how the forms didn't really interact with the users about what is a compliant design. We're going to give you our tips and tricks on these forms. I use these forms for projects every single day, so I'm a heavy user of these forms. And Sally and I also help other people use these forms, and we got a lot of feedback from the Energy Commission hotline on what's being asked the most. So we're going to go through some of those. Understanding the structure behind the forms, there actually really is a structure that is held consistent throughout all of these new dynamic forms. How scope of work really changes how the form adapts to what the energy code compliant requirements are. And so we're going to take a look at a mechanical system design for new construction and an envelope alteration to show how the forms interact. And then let you know about some places to go after today that you might need further help either through Energy Code ACE, through the Energy Commission, or EnergySoft if you are a user that is using Energy Pro to complete these forms. We are going to be using our full 2 hours today without a break, so hopefully you came prepared for no break. But we are going to use every single minute of it, and I'm hoping it will be interesting and fun. Now that you know a little bit about Sally and I, we'd love to know who's here with us today. Each of these sessions, we have a different group of people, and it changes how we talk about the content. So if you could please let us know what role you serve. We already know we have at least one plans examiner in the room. And also let me know what's your comfort level with these new dynamic forms, because that's going to help us with how far we're going to dive in deep end or back up and float a little bit on top. Looks like we have some high-end users today, Sally.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great.
Our last question for you is, what's the reason behind these non-residential certificate of compliance forms? Why do they even exist? Why do we have to fill them out? So it looks like we have one energy consultant, Dale, our plans examiner, and a few engineers. If you selected engineer, could you please in the chat tell me what your discipline is? Is it mechanical, electrical, structural, other? It just really helps us with what building features you might be concentrating on the most. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. And I love seeing that we have some people who are very comfortable with the forms, and I'm going to call on you. I would love it if you could raise your hand. If you could go to the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see this guy waving at you. Can you hit that if you're someone who said you're really comfortable with these forms? Who are my two high-end users here today? I know there's two of you. Okay, Nina, excellent. Anyone else? Okay, I won't make you have to do you raise your hand. Thank you so much, Nina. And well, you're going to find out, Nina. You're either going to go, oh, I've got this at the end of this, or you're going to go, wow, I learned more than I thought. So that's going to be good. Doesn't look like anyone wants to answer my last question here, Sally. So, Sally, for you, what is the purpose behind these forms?
Well, the certificates of compliance are submitted at the end of design, and really it's to show how the design is complying with the energy code, and also to communicate to the contractor and to the building inspector how the project design is complying as well. You've always said in the past, these are like the promise.
Yeah, these are the promise of how the design is meeting the energy code. And I always like to say, you know, changes happen out in the field. These forms don't stop at plan check. These forms still need to stay active with how the design and or the construction might be changing what was promised. And, well, is it still meeting the promise? I just had a project recently. They just wrapped up construction. They got final occupancy permit. It was a high-rise residential building. And I reran the certificate of compliance form 120 times, the majority of that being through the submittal review process. So this is something that really is supposed to stay live from start to finish with the project.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back to our presentation and start talking about the why behind what's going on with our topic today. I always like to give a little bit of background. And we're going to start with, well, we've got a handout for you. This handout was provided as a link with the last couple of emails you got, but if you're like me, you ignore emails that seem to be the same thing you're getting over and over and over again, and you might not have gotten my handout link. If you take your eye and bring it over to the left, you will see Gina's favorite resources. Energy Code ACE is the first one, of course. I got to push my own website. The Energy Commission's Online Resource Center, thank you, Daryl, for updating that. And that is the best way to navigate the Energy Commission's website. And then the very last one is handouts. If you hit that now, it will automatically open up a separate browser and download a zip file, which then I would love it for you guys to open up that zip file so that you can have these 6 pages with you as we go through our content today. The very first page is all about where to find the forms. Then we're going to go through this with you about our tips and tricks associated with these forms. What forms should you be using for what, and when do you have choices? And then we have a couple pages just to support mechanical, because the mechanical form is a very beefy, robust form, and it needed a little bit more to help people understand what's going on under the hood. And then we also have one page kind of talking about how you really have to think about scope of work and how that affects the choices you'll be making on these forms to document your building feature. These forms are applicable to the current 2019 code cycle. These did exist in the 2016 code cycle, didn't they, Sally? What did they look and feel like in the 2016 code?
You know, they really looked very similar to the 2019 forms. The only one that wasn't live for the 2016 code was the E and V, so that was still being finished up under the 2016 code cycle, but very similar. A lot of people hadn't used them because they were optional under 2016, so you could use the old static paper forms or the dynamic, but now with 2019, there's no choice. You're either using dynamic or you're going with performance.
Of which you're still, as we're going to show you, not out of the woods with these dynamic forms.
That's true, yeah.
Reference ACE is one of my favorite tools on our Energy Code ACE website. You can use it online or offline. I even have it on my phone. That's how often I use this. This has all the language of the standards, the non-residential manual that supports the information in the standards about non-residential high-rise and hotel-motel projects. It also has the residential manual, and we'll see a lot of information here for single-family, townhomes, but also the lighting and water heating requirements of our high-rise buildings, high-rise multifamily, and the appendices. The appendices is such an important document. The JA4, that's Joint Appendices Chapter 4, are all about how we get the prescriptive U factors associated with our opaque assemblies. And there's pages of that in this reference appendices, right, Sally?
Oh my gosh, yes, tables and tables.
And the envelope form includes all of them. So that's one of the things you have with these forms is a lot of code requirements and supporting data is integrated into them. I wish you guys could see a little bit what's under the hood of these forms and how kind of very robust it is in terms of how it's helping you understand the code requirements. Why did these forms come to be, Sally?
You know, we've been doing compliance improvement for several code cycles, and a lot of what we've heard from everybody, from the engineers and the designers, the energy consultants, the plans examiners, the inspectors, that there's just too much paperwork related to the energy code, just pages and pages of compliance forms. And one of the other big roadblocks previously is that there were almost 50 NRCC forms. And so people were really struggling with what form do I use for what scope. So the Energy Commission heard that and they addressed it in the 2019 cycle. And what they did was they basically took all of the forms for any given building component. So this little graphic is about indoor lighting. Under the 2016 code, there was the LTI 01 through 06, and they've combined all of those forms into one, and now there's just the LTI form. So if you hear somebody asking for the LTI 03, that form does not exist anymore. Everything has been condensed down just into an LTI for indoor lighting. So I think that's one of the major progress that these 2019 forms have made. And then another thing which we'll show later is that these forms, just like the performance form, now verify whether the project data that was put into the form complies with the energy code or not. So right on the front page, there's a table that will say complies or does not comply, just like the performance form. And then Gina, you'll show a bunch of the features in the dynamic forms that really are meant to guide people toward compliant designs. And then one of my favorite things, mostly for our field folks, the contractors and inspectors, is that these NRCCs automatically identify what inspection acceptance and verification certificates are required based on the scope of work. So the designers don't have to guess. They don't work with the field forms very much. They're not super familiar with what's going to be required, but the form automatically will make those choices.
There is a lot going on under the hood. These are the 10 forms. This is it. It's per building feature or code section associated. Indoor lighting, outdoor lighting, sign lighting, electrical distribution, solar ready, mechanical, plumbing, covered process, that's another beefy one, envelope, and design review / commissioning form. That is it. And the performance form, which is that we're not talking about that today. In understanding which forms to use for what and some of the data that's integrated into these forms, we have to give you the basics of the energy code. So I know a lot of this is going to be just a quick overview for you guys. The first building block being mandatory measures. Mandatory measures were features that were found to be cost-effective in pretty much all scopes of work, new construction, additions, alterations, and in all locations of California, all 16 climate zones. We have some measures that's what they stay. They're mandatory, and that's all we're going to be considering them as mandatory, such as the electrical distribution requirements of the code. There are no prescriptive requirements. It's 100% mandatory. Other building features such as mechanical, envelope, lighting have other measures that are layered on top of mandatory. And this is where we might have some flexibility associated with, is it new construction, an addition, or an alteration? Because cost effectiveness shows that building it for the first time, we can get a lot more energy efficiency built into that building than we can if we're making changes to an existing building. We also really look at climate zone. What's going to pay for itself in the desert might not be at all what's going to pay for itself in a coastal region. And prescriptive requirements is also an approach to show compliance, the prescriptive approach. And that's what many of these forms exist, is to allow you and others to show the prescriptive method of compliance for certain building features. I can engage the performance approach in which I'm doing trade-off among different energy features, but only for building features in which it's allowed. And let's take a look at that. So let's start up at the top with our mandatory measures. In there, we have quite a few of our covered process environments, and these are process loads that have historically been exempt to the energy code. But over the last few code cycles, more and more process environments are being covered under the energy code, hence why they're called covered process. Refrigerated warehouses have been around the longest, but in the 2013 code, we saw so many added. It was not even funny. We had retail food stores, the refrigeration equipment, enclosed parking garage, ventilation, process boilers, compressed air, elevators, escalator, moving walkways in transportation function areas such as an airport, a train station, or even BART. And then we also have commissioning. Commissioning existed actually for quite a while in Title 24 Part 11 Cal Green, but then it shifted over, some of it shifted over to the Energy Code in the 2013 code, and we actually have commissioning requirements in both Part 11 and Part 6. Hey, let's just get more confusing. What does commissioning look like in the Energy Code, Sally?
You know, it looks really similar to what everybody knows as commissioning, the typical commissioning process. So the requirements in Section 120.8 are pretty short, but they do follow commissioning. Now, for smaller buildings, it really only requires identifying owner's requirements and then doing a design review to check for those. But in larger buildings, it's the more traditional commissioning process. It's a little more involved during design and then also involves some field supervision and functional performance testing and stuff during construction. So if you guys are familiar with the old 2016 commissioning forms, it was the CSR 01 through 05. I really recommend you take a look at this new commissioning form. It's very different than what was required for the 2016 forms. But I do think this new form much better supports the typical commissioning process.
In fact, I would love to see a show of hands of people here in the room today that are involved with commissioning. Can you raise your hand? Remember, that's that guy raising, looking at you in the left-hand corner. Can you raise your hand if you currently do commissioning and or are a design reviewer in the industry? Do we have anyone who currently does that? Nina, I'm assuming your hand was still up from last time. Okay, Victoria does that. So I just wanted to get a feel of how many design reviewers and or commissioning agents we had in the room. So thank you so much. Solar Ready, this is applicable to new buildings and buildings that are adding on more than 2,000 square feet that has a roof. We have our Solar Ready being ready for a future solar thermal or solar PV system. And our electrical power distributions, just like we talked about, those are only mandatory. Now in this box are building features that can choose to use the prescriptive approach or use the performance approach. I can choose to use the prescriptive approach for my envelope features, or that can go into the envelope bucket, into the performance bucket. I don't get to put it in both. If I choose to use the prescriptive approach for the envelope, I should not be seeing a performance form that has envelope features that are being used to show compliance. Same with mechanical. I can choose to do mechanical prescriptively or choose to use it using the performance approach. And I have to tell you, in the last code cycle, a lot of people chose to go the prescriptive route for mechanical because there were some weird rules going on under the hood in the performance approach. Oh my gosh, guys, that has been cleaned up so much it's not even funny. And the performance approach has become a really nice tool for our mechanical systems, including for the first time we have the ability to model variable refrigerant flow systems in the performance approach and get some nice credit for that type of system design. So if you were a prescriptive only person in the mechanical in the 2016 code, you might want to play around with performance in this 2019 code. Our domestic hot water service water heating systems, our solar thermal system associated with high-rise multifamily or hotel motel buildings when using a central water heating system, and the lighting that's in the thermal envelope that's conditioned. I can't include my lighting outside that thermal envelope, but I can include the lighting within it, or I can mix it all up in that performance approach. These are prescriptive measures that we cannot use to trade off energy features in the performance approach. And a lot of people think that prescriptive always means I get to trade it in the performance approach. That's not what it means at all. Prescriptive means it might be requirements that look different for new versus addition or alteration, and might change based on climate zone and or potentially lighting zone. So did I say lighting zone twice? Climate zone and or lighting zone. I wasn't sure. So this is going to be my lighting in my indoor unconditioned spaces has to show compliance prescriptively only. Same with sign lighting, same with outdoor lighting. And also I have a few covered process environments that are prescriptive that I cannot engage the performance approach to show compliance. And one of these is a little tricky, my computer rooms. You will see in the mechanical form that there is support to computer room equipment, crack units. Well, I'm only going to use them in the mechanical form if it's a computer room that doesn't have more than 20 watts per square foot of power density. The minute my computer room has so much equipment in it that it exceeds that 20 watts per square foot, I'm going to use the covered processed form to show compliance to that crack unit. I'm not going to be using the mech form. Now let's get into our 4 topics that we want to talk about with you today. Our tips and tricks, the form structure, let's look at a new project, and then let's wrap up with looking at an alteration project. But we're going to get started with tips and tricks, and this is the page in your handout that's applicable to this. Strongly recommend you have it with you, especially you, Dale. You're going to find a lot of this stuff is going to help you answer questions for people over the counter and who might be having issues with these forms. You might just want to say, oh, this one page here is going to help you out. Sally, walk us through these tips and tricks.
Yeah, I think before I start, I want to say this list was really developed because we at Energy Code ACE get a lot of questions about how to complete these forms. And then so does the Energy Commission hotline staff. And they've shared with us their FAQs that they're getting through the hotline. So we put this list together to help answer some of those FAQs. And it starts at the very beginning, which is, where do I find these NRCC forms? In fact, for a long time, the #1 question to the hotline is, where are the forms, which I thought was really interesting.
I still think that's in their top 90 percentile of how many times it gets asked.
Yeah, I believe it. So here's the slide. This is where to find the forms. So you've really got 3 options. The first is, if you want to use the dynamic PDF, then you're going to go to the Energy Commission's website, and I will show you in the next screen how to navigate the Online Resource Center and get to the forms. But there's the URL right there. The second option you have to complete these forms is through the Energy Code ACE website, and the Forms ACE tool has been expanded in 2019 to help people complete the forms. So in previous code cycles, Forms ACE was really just about identifying which forms were necessary based on your scope of work. But for 2019, a nice module has been added, at least for non-res, to help folks complete the forms. And then the last option to fill these out is through Energy Pro. So if you're an Energy Pro user, EnergySoft has updated their module to accommodate 2019 standards, and as part of that, you can complete the prescriptive and mandatory forms through Energy Pro. All right, let's look at the Online Resource Center real quick. So this is the Energy Commission's website, and you can go straight to the Online Resource Center using this, and you'll see on there a little expandable accordion menu, and compliance forms is one of the options on that menu. And if you click on compliance forms, then you will end up on this page, and you'll see there's residential and non-residential under compliance forms. Today we're only going to be talking about non-residential because the dynamic forms are only for non-residential, not for residential. So if you click on this non-residential hyperlink, you'll end up on this page, and this is where all of the non-residential forms are. So we've got acceptance certificates, compliance certificates, installation, and verification. Today we're really mostly going to be focusing here on the NRCCs, the compliance certificates. One of the other things to notice on this page, which a lot of people don't notice, is that there's some important information up here at the top about using the correct web browser and being able to download the form, and we'll show a screenshot of that as well. Another one of the big issues with these is with Bluebeam users. So Bluebeam is a very popular PDF software in our industry, and unfortunately Bluebeam does not support dynamic aspects of forms. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but do know there's a little bit of information here on the Energy Commission's website that talks about issues for Bluebeam users specifically.
And I would love to hear right now, can I get a show of hands? Who here uses Bluebeam? Who here is a Bluebeam aficionado? It's almost always my mechanical engineers. It's almost always.
Yeah,
okay, so we've got a couple Bluebeam, Bluebeam users in the room. We're really going to, okay, we got even more. I'm not surprised by this. We're really going to help you guys on how best to still utilize using Bluebeam, but also be successful with the forms.
Yeah, you guys are really going to benefit from this, I think. Okay, so if on the Energy Commission's website you click on this NRCC folder, it's going to bring you through to this page where it's showing the different NRCC forms. These are the 10 forms that Gina showed earlier. One of the things to notice here is that these forms are updated. So the Energy Commission hotline staff does get some bug reports here and there. So the Commission is doing some batch updating of each of these forms, And over here in the modified column, you'll be able to see when the Energy Commission last uploaded a version of this. So I highly recommend if you're starting a new project and using the form from scratch, that you just come to the Energy Commission's website, download a new form, and that way you can ensure that you've got the latest version. Okay, now we'll talk about the Energy Code's website, which you guys are hopefully familiar with since you're on this decoding talk. But if you go to the Energy Code site, here's the URL, and then you go to this Tools menu on the navigation bar, and you click on the Forms-Based tool, then it's going to bring you to this window. And as we said, today we're talking about non-residential forms. So if you expand that, then you will see a couple of options here through the Forms-Based. The first one is this, being able to complete the NRCCs online through the Forms-Based tool. This tool is really, Gina, for users that need a little bit more help going through the forms and completing them. So this tool asks questions about your project and really kind of leads you through. It's got a lot of help tips, that kind of stuff, that can help you complete the form correctly. As you guys will see as Gina presents her project scenarios using the mechanical and the envelope form, you really do have to understand the code requirements in order to use these dynamic forms with ease. They're complicated because the code requirements are complicated. So this forms-based tool was really built to help people who are not expert users get completed forms. The other option here through the forms-based tool is pointing people to the dynamic PDFs. This again is because a large number of users question is where are the forms. So you can go to the CEC's website or you can come to the Energy Code's website, and basically these hyperlink through to the forms from the Energy Commission's website. All right. And then our last way, as we mentioned, was using Energy Pro. So EnergySoft did implement these 2019 forms in their prescriptive modules. So if you are a user of those, you'll be able to get the forms also through Energy Pro. Now, one of the things to note here, Gina, is that both Energy Pro and the forms-based tool will produce a static PDF. So the Energy Commission's website is where you go to find the dynamic PDF where you would complete the PDF itself. Energy Pro and the forms-based both have these user interfaces, they're software. And then what you get in the end is the PDF form, but it's a static version that's not editable. You have to edit it through the user interface.
For those of you who don't have the ability to put, and yes, you're right, Victoria, Adobe does support the forms. You have to have the right one, though. If you don't have the ability to put an Adobe product on your computers and you only get Bluebeam, well, then how you need to fill out these forms is either through Forms-Based or Energy Pro, because the dynamic forms, as we're going to see right here, are not supported by many other software products whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah, this has really been a surprise, I think. So one of the other major issues then is opening the dynamic form. So now we told you where to find it, and now step 2 is let's open it. So if you go to the Commission's website and you click on one of the hyperlinked PDF names, this is what you're going to see. And Gina and I have joked a lot over these decoding talks that if you do this and please wait, you're going to be please waiting for quite a long time, because what your web browser is trying to do is open this PDF within the web browser, and web browsers can't open dynamic PDFs. So do not wait. I wish this was editable by the Energy Commission, but it's not, so that's unfortunate. So don't wait. Just go ahead and download the form to your computer, put it on your desktop, put it in your project folder, whatever you need, but get it down on your computer, and once you do that, you'll be able to open the PDF there. Now, here's what Gina was hinting at, and Victoria, it looks like you figured this out, is that you really need to use Adobe Reader, and I recommend the 2017 version, but you need to use Adobe Reader if you're going to use the dynamic forms. So these forms were programmed in an Adobe software. However, and surprisingly, a lot of other Adobe products like Adobe Pro or Adobe Reader Touch do not work with the dynamic features of these forms, and neither does Bluebeam. They just don't support dynamic forms. So avoid a lot of frustration for yourself. Take the 10 minutes. Adobe Reader is free. Download it, and when you're using dynamic forms, please do use Adobe Reader. The tricky part, Gina, is that you can open the forms in Adobe Pro and Bluebeam.
It seems like they're working.
So
it seems like
it looks like they're working. That's right. And then you come across something where a drop-down menu doesn't populate or whatever, calculations aren't working, and so it's a little deceptive. All right.
I have found out the hard way, too, that the version of Adobe Reader does matter. And I went through at least 3 versions of Adobe Reader before I went, okay, 2017 seems to be the safest one, and that's, of course, that's when Sally told me that.
That's right. So the Energy Commission did a lot of testing on these forms, and primarily it was in Adobe Reader 2017. So that's the safest bet by far. Gina, I'm going to let you take this one about how to import them into CAD or Bluebeam, because I know even if you use Adobe Reader to fill it out, you still need to get it on your plan set.
These dynamic forms do not import well. If you're going to do any sort of import action, you're going to want to print to PDF. When we take these dynamic forms and print to PDF, we're locking them down and we're taking away the dynamic aspect of the forms and we're making them a static PDF. And the minute they're a static PDF, we can import them and do all the things. We've gotten very comfortable with what we do with PDFs. So that's why I'd like to not call it a dynamic PDF. I call it a dynamic form. And it's only a PDF once I've printed it to PDF and converted it to a static PDF.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Okay, one of the other issues we're hearing from users is when Table C says does not comply. So I mentioned earlier there is a compliance results table on these forms, just like on the perf, and it says complies or does not comply, just like on the performance form. So if you, Dale, if you see a plan set that has forms and it says does not comply on the form, that's an automatic plan check comment, right? So all the forms that are submitted for permit application should say complies or complies with exceptional conditions. You should not see a does not comply. So we're going to talk about, well, what do you do if you see does not comply? So if you're completing this form, and this is a very typical Table C, this is the process form. So there are several tables on the form. Each one is kind of addressing a different aspect of the covered process requirements. You can see we've got the table names here, Table F, Table G, Table H. So if you see on Table C it says does not comply, you start to go across the row here and say, okay, where's my problem? My problem is here in Table K. So it looks like what doesn't comply are my elevators. So that's the first sort of troubleshooting. The second thing to look at is Table D. So right after Table C is going to be Table D. And this table is auto-populated by the form. So this is not user notes. This is the form giving notes. So the form is telling us, hey, Table K indicates one or more elevators which have designed ventilation watts per CFM greater than the maximum allowed. Please check out Table K and revise it. So now we know where the issue is in Table K. It's with one of our elevators is not compliant with the ventilation requirements. So then we come down to Table K and we say, all right, this first section is all about lighting, so that's not where the issue is. The issue is down here with ventilation. And Table D told us that it's a design watts is greater than the maximum allowed. So we're going to look at our elevators and find out where the issue is, and it's right here with the first elevator. So Table D will often give a note about what's not compliant in Table C. That's not 100% the case, but oftentimes it is the case. So go check out Table D if you're having issues complying. And then another example of what might be going on if you have a does not comply. So now we're seeing that our issue is here in Table H with our parking garage. So we're going to go down to Table H and look. And in general, the entire table needs to be completed. So a lot of the logic in Table C says, if all of the fields are completed and this happens, then it complies. So if your fields aren't completed, it's automatically going to say no and does not comply. So this is an example of where we've got what Gina and I call a declaration statement. So you'll see this on several of the forms where there's a code requirement and we're asking the documentation author to say, yes, my design includes this code requirement. So we can see here rows 6 through 9 are not completed. The documentation author has not made that declaration, and that's resulting in Table C saying no, which is resulting in this does not comply over here. Gina, do you want to talk for a minute on, from the viewpoint of the documentation author on being able to click these or not?
I sometimes find that the design documents are not fully supporting, especially the mandatory requirements. Many of the mandatory requirements need to be supported either with note blocks and or within the specifications. And I might have to go back to the designer as the energy consultant and go, I can't fill out this form completely because I see nothing about how you are supporting your CO sensors. So I don't want to click yes, your design supports this unless you put something in your drawings or your specs to support this. So this is where these forms really can be used as a design aid in helping our design professionals be aware of what code requirements need to be supported with the design to show compliance to the energy code. And I also want to point out that lines 1 and 2 here, those are not selected, and we're not really talking about those. Many times these tables start with the ability to show I'm taking an exception to this requirement, of which if I were to pick yes to the garage is expected to have vehicles with non-gasoline combustion engines, blah, 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 this whole table blanks out. But then I have to provide support that I do not have gas engines that are burning within the space, because that's what these requirements are all about, is to provide healthy, safe air for the occupants with these spaces with gas combustion. So a lot of times you're going to look at this and you're going to read each line. Is this an exception or is this a declaration statement? Declaration statements must always say yes. You don't get to say no, but I might not be engaging the exceptions.
Yeah. And then also in a lot of these tables, we're having the documentation author say where in the design documents, in the construction docs, does it show these features. And so this is really for the plans examiner to be able to go straight to P1 and not have to hunt for where they can find documentation of these requirements. So here's an example. Now we've completed 6 through 9 here. We've got a yes up here, and now Table C says complies. So those are a few steps to go through if you've got a Table C that says does not comply. Another question we've had, or we've seen a lot, is when a table is minimized, such as this, and it says this section does not apply. And the documentation author is saying, hey, wait, I really think I should be documenting the separation of electrical circuits for monitoring, but the table isn't expanded, so I can't do that. So under these circumstances, you really should be looking over here at what we call the table tip. And unfortunately, this thing looks like a button, but it's not a button, so don't click it. Just put your mouse over it and hover there. And if you hover over it, then it's going to show you the little table tip. And a lot of times the table tip will say, here's what needs to happen, which would make this table expand. So what this is on the electrical form, what this is saying is new or complete replacement electrical service will expand Table G because that's what triggers this requirement. So if we go up to Table B and say, okay, well, let's look. The scope of work that's been chosen in Table B is an addition or alteration to the feeders and branch circuits. That doesn't have to comply with these requirements. So Table G knows that and is staying minimized and saying this doesn't apply to this project. Now, if we were to change in Table B the scope and say it's a new electrical service, equipment, and meter, then Table G is going to expand because the form knows that for new service, you do have to show compliance here and document it. And so it expands for the documentation author. I think this is a really nice feature, and we'll talk later as we go through the tables about how very important it is to complete Table B accurately.
I love the fact that these forms and just how they even open up or close up are helping me understand the triggers and scope of code. And I have to tell you, the first time, every time there's a new form that came out in the last couple years, I would sit there and click every drop-down option, every single one, and I would try every different option and see how it changed the form just to get a feel of how code applies for that particular building feature. Did I ever tell you I did that?
No, but I'm not surprised. You know, Gina and I have talked a lot about that there's just going to be a learning curve with these forms. You're going to have to use them for a little bit to understand how they work and understand kind of the logic in there. And that's just the case. They're just new. One of the other things we're hearing a lot is when a drop-down doesn't populate. So as you guys use these forms, you'll notice that there's lots of drop-downs, and a lot of the drop-downs are customized, so they change based on previous selections you've made in previous tables. So this is a good example. This is on the indoor lighting form. Table P is all about power adjustment factors and documenting those. So you can see it's pretty far down in the form because it's Table P. And this drop-down is populated by Table F above. Table F is our luminaire schedule. So if you skip down to Table P and don't complete Table F, this drop-down is going to be blank because it's looking for the fixtures that you put up here in Table F. So it's very important to go through these forms in order. So you start with Table A, you go to B, etc., and you don't skip around from table to table because a lot of the subsequent tables are using information and project data that's been put in previous tables. Another issue, which we've already mentioned with the drop-down menus not being populated, is for Bluebeam users. So again, if you open these forms in Bluebeam, it looks like it's working, and then you get to a drop-down and it's blank. If the drop-down is blank, you really can't proceed because you do need to complete all the fields in the table for Table C to say complies. And if the drop-down's blank, you can't complete it. So I highly recommend take those 2 minutes, download Adobe Reader 2017, and it's going to save you a lot of frustration. Gina, one of your favorites is this reset button. I think we put this in at your request.
I think it was. I would love reset buttons throughout the day, at the end of the week, when my kids are mean to me. I just want to hit reset. And the reset button is scattered throughout these forms, and they're typically associated with tables that have a lot of stuff going on. And these forms, they're not smart forms. They're dynamic forms. And sometimes they just get clogged up, and the logic is just not quite functioning properly. So sometimes you have to reset a table just because weird stuff is happening. And I can't even really give you good examples of when that's going to happen, but when you're going to do this, when you're really getting frustrated, you might want to save it as a different name, and then reset the table and see if it's correcting some of the issues you might be having. And and also you could be doing it because it completely changed the schedules. Gosh dang it, I have this 30 line items on my framed wall table that matches up with the detail numbers, but then they changed everything. Well, then I'll probably just want to hit reset for that table. Don't start from scratch. Just reset the one table And you'll notice that they only really kind of show up on some tables, and those are on tables that we have really found have issues. And or there was people like me that asked for them on specific tables, right, Sally?
Yeah, that's right. And like you said, it's usually tables where somebody's entered in a lot of project data. And these tables start to get screwed up when you're going back and changing things that you've already selected. So the reset really helps that. All right, let's see what our last one is about signing and adding the responsible person. Why don't you take this one, Gina? I know you guys do this a lot.
So collecting signatures is always fun, and it still is the #1 plan check comment I get on all of my projects, even though we give clear directions and we do these huge red arrows everywhere we need to have our designers sign, but they always miss one or two or all. It's crazy how many times all are missed. So we're going to be collecting our signatures. I sign as the documentation author, as the energy consultant, so whoever fills out the form, okay, it's the responsible person that's taking the liability that the features that are represented in this form match the design, which is meeting code. And that is as dictated by the Business and Professions Code Division 3, pretty much always typically needing a design professional, either a licensed architect, licensed designer, or licensed contractor. Now, I could potentially have where I can do my digital signatures, but there's something that's been added to these forms that is, to me, it makes me jump up and down in joy. Some of the forms, I need multiple responsible people to sign off. And an example of that is the design review commissioning form, where I find that my mechanical engineers do not want to sign off on the envelope issues, which is the architect. And the architect doesn't want to sign off on the electrical features because, well, that's the electrical engineer. So I can keep adding responsible persons and add a little description of this person's going to sign off on mechanical. This person's going to sign off on electrical. You'll notice the little red tags disappeared for those digital signatures the minute I have the ability to do additional people. And we'll show you in our example the best way to capture signatures in that situation. This add responsible person isn't in all of the forms. It's on the forms where it was found to be most common. We need to have multiple responsible persons sign the form. So that's going through our tips and tricks. Let's ask you a couple of questions. So you might want to have the page of the handout that supports these tips and tricks to answer my questions. What should you do if you get a please wait when you go to download the forms? What can you do if you're just not sure how to use a table? And then my last question is going to be, can you use Bluebeam? Okay, looks like I only have like 4 people who want to answer my questions. Just, you know, I don't know who you are, so I won't know if you were wrong or right. I just know how many people are answering. But it looks like our crowd is pretty chill today. So all of you chose be chill and download to your computer and then open up an Adobe Reader. Please don't stress or panic. That's not what we want you to do today. What can you do if you're just not sure how a table works? Well, everyone who answered hit in it, I should have said hover over the question image. There'll be information for you. That's a good answer, but also is all of the above. So we'd really like you to try to hover over the question button first, and then please, if you're getting frustrated and you're still not understanding, you can either call the hotline staff. They've really upped their game in being able to support these forms, or you can submit an email to info@EnergyCodeAce, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you have also. But try the hover button first. Here, can you use Bluebeam? Guess what? All of you are right. No, you have to use Adobe Reader, and we suggest version 2017. But also, yes, but only after you print it to a static PDF. That's also right, meaning my last answer choice, either of the above, is also right. So all of you are right. Excellent. Let's go back to our presentation. You guys did great. And let's talk about the structure behind the forms. So the structure behind the forms really helps you understand what was the intent to many of these tables. And tables A through F are consistently the exact same tables in terms of their intent on every single one of these 10 forms. And then they're always going to wrap up with what forms are needed out in the field and collecting signatures. And let's just start with Table A. Sally, what's so important about Table A?
You know, this one is a really good example of a typical Table A. So Table A is really just general information for the project, city, climate zone, occupancy type, floor areas, that kind of stuff. You can, if you're confused about how to answer any of these, you can always hover over that table tip. In some instances, so this is an example on the commissioning form, the Table A actually is customized to show what is useful to know if you trigger the commissioning requirements and need to continue completing this form. So things like occupancy type, non-residential condition floor area, project type, and HVAC system type are all inputs into whether or not you have to complete the commissioning form. So in Table A, the very first thing you do, you complete this stuff for your project, and then if you don't trigger commissioning, Table A is going to give you a note that says, hey, wait, occupancy types that are these or additions and alterations are not required to comply with commissioning requirements and don't need to complete this form. So if you start at Table A, and commissioning is not the only form like this, there are others as well, and it will give you a stop. Don't even proceed. Your scope of work doesn't trigger these requirements. You don't need to complete this form any further. Now, Gina, I know you've had some building departments ask you for this kind of proof if you don't turn in a form.
Well, sometimes I find I get these questions because building departments will go, Gina will answer this question. Gina answers all questions. And they'll go, Gina, why are you not giving me this? I'm like, because I don't have to. I go, the form even tells me I don't have to. And they're like, can you give us a screenshot, give us a letter, something that helps support the fact that the form told you you didn't need to give me the form? Because I got to tell you, if there's one thing I hate is filling out a form just to say I didn't need to fill out the form. But I get it, but I love the fact that these forms integrate that type of feedback for us so we don't fill out a form that we don't have to fill out. And the Table A is going to change based on the topic, based on the building feature. Like here for the envelope form, occupancy really matters because the U-factor requirements that we have to meet are very dependent upon occupancy and climate zone and scope of work. And here is the envelope form when we're looking at Table B. B is the backbone to these forms. It is the most important table in the form because you're setting the scope of work, and every single button you press is going to open up potentially different tables or a different combination of tables. So here's an example of where I either have a new construction project, and if I just click new construction here, I'm not done yet. The form only knows now, okay, it's new, but I also have to say whether I have a roof, if I have walls, I have floors, exterior doors, fenestration. I have to pick every building feature that's associated with my new construction. I have to do the same thing as if it was an addition because the rules slightly change for an addition. And the rules change quite a bit if I have an alteration. And I potentially might have an addition plus an alteration. So sometimes I might have multiple scope of work that is supported by these forms to really capture everything happening with the project. So really go through and look at what Table B is asking, and sometimes Table B is going to change based on Table A, right, Sally?
Yeah, and this is a really good example of that. This is the Solar Ready form. So like we were saying earlier, it's really important to complete these forms in order. Table A on the Solar Ready form is collecting what building type this project is. And then down here, you'll see in Table B that these two options for solar water heating systems and the smart thermostat with an additional measure are not open. And that's because those only apply to hotel, motel, or high-rise res occupancies. So if we were to choose hotel, motel, or high-rise res up here, these guys would open up and you would have those choices as compliance options. So again, the subsequent tables are looking at the data that's been entered in the previous tables. And so it is really important to totally complete these tables before you move on.
There's also an awful lot of hyperlinks in all of these tables. Go ahead and click a hyperlink anytime if you're wondering why isn't it opening up, you might read the image, the hyperlink, and the information supporting how that table is addressing that particular building feature. So Table C, as I'm hoping everyone knows already, is all about the form, the prescriptive and mandatory forms now indicating whether the project is in compliance to the information that has been input. Now, it needs to be completely input. So if we're missing anything, well, that's going to be an issue. So we saw a couple examples of that in tips and tricks. And many times there's multiple lines in Table C. So this is our outdoor lighting form. And the first line here is all about the wattage allowances and how our project is showing compliance to the wattage allowances. But I have two more lines here. I also have cutoff compliance and control compliance. And whereas I might have successfully shown compliance to the wattage allowances, I haven't finished and/or completed correctly what needs to happen for controls. You can see here how the form didn't even open up cutoff compliance and actually is saying right there, not applicable. Well, the form knows that you didn't put any light fixtures that exceed 6,200 lumens, which is the trigger for our bug cutoff requirements of the Energy Code. Table C is also going to glean information from Table B. So we've seen our covered process form a few times now about how we have multiple building features that could be supported in one form. Table B is going to dictate what opens up in Table C. D and F are all about best practices. Sally, what are D and E telling us?
So if you guys remember, we looked at Table D earlier, and Table D is the form either telling the documentation author some information or the plans examiner. So the documentation author should definitely read these Table D notes before they go in for permit application, because there may be an error that the form's telling you about. So this one is for the outdoor lighting form, and it's saying total hardscape area in Table A does not match the areas entered in Table I. Please review for compliance. So you don't want to turn that into the plans examiner, because the plans examiner is going to say, hey, what's going on here with this error? But some of these notes in Table D are meant for the plans examiner, and so you can turn in a form, and these last two are examples of that. So this note is saying the selections made in Table O, which is the NRCI table, have been changed by the permit applicant. See Table E for the permit applicant's explanation. So the form is saying, hey, the permit applicant has changed something that was auto-selected in Table O and in Table P. Go to Table E and look for their explanation. Table E is completely just a text box that's open for the documentation author to make remarks about the project. So it may be a fringe case, it may be some kind of special condition, it may be whatever note you need to put in for the plans examiner. You can also make notes to the contractor or to the inspector, and those notes should be here for these other parties to look at.
I always use Table E, always, always, always. I rarely have an NRCC form that doesn't have some supplementary information that I am providing. I just think it really helps tie together things that might be in question. Table F is where all the parts of the form that support the actual design features starts happening. And Table F, throughout all of these forms, the intent was to make them the schedule associated with that building feature. So this is our outdoor lighting form, and you can see that this is a light fixture schedule. You're going to see Table F for the indoor lighting form is going to start off with a light fixture table. Table F for the mechanical form is going to be a mechanical equipment schedule. So Table F typically is getting started with let's link the schedules of the design and get them into the form so we can start talking about how these particular scheduled features of the building are meeting code. Solar Ready, it's all about what solar zones might be showing up on the roof plan and or site plan. That's that schedule of how the site is showing compliance to Solar Ready. And sometimes we have multiple Table Fs where there's a table within a table within a table. Sally, walk them through what we're seeing here for the plumbing form.
Yeah, the plumbing form's a good example of this. So you guys can see here's the main heading for Table F on the plumbing form. And then these subtables, that's what I call them, sometimes are based on the type of equipment. So for example, plumbing systems can be central systems, they can be individual, and so in Table B, the documentation author on this form has indicated that their plumbing systems are individual systems, and so it's triggered this subtable for documentation because the requirements for individual systems are different than those for central systems. And then on this table in particular, there's another water heating equipment, which is subtable, which is applicable to all occupancies. So this subtable will always trigger under Table F. So you'll see this as the main heading, but you may see subheadings like these and have these little subtables under a main table.
So make sure to go all the way through to the end of all of these tables that open up. There's a lot of stuff that sometimes gets tucked to the bottom of the table. And here, here is an example of what Sally was talking about, how Table B potentially can change which table is going to be showing up for you to support your schedule. So this is sign lighting. I have 3 different ways I can show compliance for sign lighting. I use the alternate light source. So that's where now it's not actually Table F, it's G that's opening up to ask about what's going on with my sign lighting schedule. If I had decided to use the maximum allowed lighting power approach, well then Table F would have opened up. If I used energy verified label, Table H. So sometimes the tables are different letters only because they're supporting potentially different pathway options for these building features. The NRCI, A, and V tables, just like Sally had said earlier, auto-populate. But I still want to make sure you guys go through and look at these because your scope of work might be just slightly unique to what's been programmed in terms of the logic behind these forms. And I clicked a little bit too fast here. The forms will even tell you when you don't have these forms. So for commissioning, it says right here, I don't have any installation forms associated with commissioning. Sally, tell them a little bit about that logic that's going on. Let's give the NRCAs as an example.
Yeah, this is indoor lighting NRCAs, and it's a good example. So the form has logic in it that will move this NRCA LTIO2 from no over to yes. So if you make selections and project data in the previous tables, these will automatically move over. However, they are editable, and this is what we were talking about earlier. If the form moves it from no to yes, and you look at it, you're like, no, that's not right, because we have some case that means we don't need this acceptance test. You can move it back to no, but then Table D is going to trigger that note that says, hey, the permit applicant has made a change in Table U. Go look at Table E for their explanation. So if you move one of these radio buttons in the NRCI, NRCA, or NRCV tables, you need to tell the plans examiner why in Table E.
So it also, again, will tell you when you don't have acceptance testing requirements of that building feature. And for our certificate of verification, these are HERS measures. Now, when it comes to non-residential HERS measures that may be associated with the project, if I've triggered any of these, only this one NRCV form needs to be registered through a HERS provider. I don't have to have all the forms registered like I would for a residential project. For non-res, it's just the one certificate of verification that's going to be provided by the HERS rater at the end of the project that needs to be registered. And then, of course, we have our signature blocks. We have different ways we can go about using that. Let's do a check your understanding now that we've gone through kind of that overarching structure of the forms. And I got to tell you, my first question here is pretty hard. I'm hoping I'm going to get more than 4 people to try to make a stab at this. What certificate of compliance forms, all of them, are you going to need to show minimum compliance to the energy code for a brand new 1-story office building? And then my next question for you is, can you include outdoor lighting in your performance calculation and trade its energy towards something else? Okay, looks like my people who are answering are slowing down a bit here. Okay, so for my first question, you could use a prescriptive pathway of which A is appropriate, your prescriptive envelope, mechanical, and lighting forms, but you will also need to provide your mandatory design review, commissioning, solar ready, and electrical distribution form. If you choose to use the performance approach for your envelope, mechanical, and/or indoor lighting systems, that's fine. But you also have to provide your mandatory certificate of compliance forms for commissioning, design review, solar ready, and electrical power distribution. So the appropriate answer is D, either A, if you choose to do the prescriptive pathway, or C, if you want to engage the performance approach for those features of the building that can be included in the performance approach. You still have to document everything else. Excellent. Can you include outdoor lighting in your performance report and allow energy trade-off? No, you cannot. The only lighting features that you can use in your performance calculation is lighting within the conditioned thermal envelope. Any lighting outside of that, including outdoor lighting, has to show compliance via the prescriptive approach. You will always need an NRCC LTO form. It can never be wrapped in to the performance report. Excellent. Let's go back to our presentation, and we're going to walk through an example of using the NRCC MEC form for a brand new project. So my brand new project is going to be a winery, and we are going to use a variable refrigerant flow system that's becoming a very popular system choice even for wineries. And I'm going to start filling out my form. My table A is supporting the fact it's in Sonoma because, in my opinion, wineries, the best wineries, only exist in Sonoma County. Yes, I did grow up in Sonoma County and worked for a very long time in the winery industry, I got to tell you. That first mechanical engineering firm, that's what we did mainly, was wineries. That's climate zone 2, and I've got my conditioned versus my unconditioned floor areas and my number of stories. It didn't have my occupancy type, so I went ahead and picked other and filled in that this is a winery. So I'm feeling pretty comfortable right now. I'm doing good. And then I get to table B, and I'm a little overwhelmed, and I'm not quite sure what to pick. And what Sally and I have been seeing is that people aren't picking enough. They're not selecting their entire scope of work, because when I hover over the question image, it's telling me you got to pick anything associated with heating and cooling controls and any other component. that is associated with that mechanical design. Let's take a look at what that might mean. So my first column here is all about my air systems. What are you pushing around the building with air? Are you pushing around heating air? Are you pushing around cooling air? And you're always going to have controls. I personally feel that that should always be selected for you, and it should always be selected. Whenever I have changes or additions or a brand new mechanical system, I always need to show compliance to the mechanical controls. But I'm not done yet. And here's an example of my air systems that would, if I'm using it, if I got a split DX system, guess what? I'm going to pick heating and cooling and mechanical controls. If I have a split DX cooling only, well, then I'm going to hit cooling and mechanical controls. Just really think through what is the design. And I still have to think about the rest of Table B. Do I have any hydronic system features associated with my design? So this is when typically more associated with either 2 or 4 pipe system or a built-up system. And then I'm going to look at my dry system components. And this, you're always going to select something in column 3. Always, always, always. Economizers, it depends on the size of the equipment. Electric resistance, it depends. You get to use it just a few times with exceptions mainly for supplementary strip heat. If you have fans, you're going to click fans, whether those fans are supply fans, exhaust fans, transfer fans. If it's a fan serving the conditioned spaces of the building, you're going to hit fans. Someone had a great question yesterday. How about the fans that are out in my unconditioned warehouse? We're not going to worry about those. We just want the mechanical systems and zones associated with the conditioned spaces of the building, anything between 55 and 95 degrees. The ductwork associated with those systems, ventilation, you're always going to have ventilation you have to show compliance to. And my zonal terminal unit is only going to be associated with my VAV boxes. We'll see how we're not going to use that for our VRF indoor units. They're not VAV boxes. So here's an example of filling out Table B with a couple of different equipment types. I have my Rooftop Package DX, and it has an economizer. So I definitely have an air system for both heating and cooling, and I always have controls. I don't have any hydronic pieces of equipment, but I do have an economizer. I'm going to assume this system must mean that this system is over 54,000 BTU of cooling. I have fans, ductwork, and ventilation, but since this is not a VAV system, I don't have any zonal systems. But hey, let's look at a VAV system. So here's a packaged rooftop VAV system with hot water reheat. So I do have air systems for heating and cooling, and yes, I always have mechanical controls. But now I also have a boiler that's providing my hot water reheat. I have pumps that are pushing that hot water around, and because I'm pushing hot water around in piping, I will also need to show compliance to the hot water piping, insulation, and other various requirements regarding piping. And under my dry systems, I am going to have an economizer because it's going to be something probably that's over 54,000 BTU of cooling. I have fans, I have ductwork, I have ventilation, and at this point for this system, I do have VAV boxes, so I'm going to select the zonal system terminal box selection. But we have a variable a VRF system. So I have an outdoor unit, a 20-ton outdoor unit, and I have 10 2-ton indoor units. And I'm also going to be using a DOAS system for my ventilation. So I'm going to click that, yes, I do have air systems that are pushing heating and cooling air. I have controls. I don't have any hydronic systems. I'm not 100% sure about economizers. I can't quite remember when I need them and when I don't. So you know what? I'm going to go ahead and click that, and I'm going to let the form help me design my mechanical system about whether I need them or not, or if it's a choice. I can always choose to provide economizers, but I might not be required to provide economizers. I have fans, I have ductwork. That fan is that DOAS system, the fans with those indoor units, ductwork associated with the DOAS system, and of course, I have ventilation. Then we get to Table F. Table F has caused a lot of heartache for people. So Sally and I created this handout. And Sally, I can't get the green arrow at all. It's not moving for me. Can you move the green arrow? Yay, okay. I'm going to let Sally walk us through here. Yeah, Sally gets to do the green arrow then. The very first line of these tables is a name. It's an equipment name. And they might be very elusive to you. Sally, where are these names coming from?
So these names are coming from the energy standards, either Title 24, Part 6, or Title 20. So we are capturing equipment efficiencies from both. And the names of those tables in Title 24, they're in Section 110.2. That's where these equipment categories are coming from.
So if you're feeling a little overwhelmed and not quite sure what to use, either one, you can keep your hands on this handout for after today, or you can go to the efficiency tables and the standards. In fact, if you had your hand on this table gives you those efficiency tables and where to go for them. Underneath the names is a series of different types of, in this case, unitary AC equipment. You have to pick the one that's applicable to your system design. And if you were to go to these tables in the standards, you will see that this follows exactly how the minimum efficiency tables are laid out in Title 24, Part 6. But we've had so many questions about this, so we decided to add the purple row. And the purple row was doing a lot of research of what does Energy Pro, CBEC-COM, ASHRAE, AHRI, what are industry standard names for this equipment? And we tried to support that as much as possible to really help you feel comfortable with, are you making the right choice? Now, there is one pull-down option that's not like the other ones. It's unique, and that one is furnace plus AC. This is not just one line item. This is actually combining two line items. This is when you have a split or packaged DX system and you have gas heating. If you have gas heating, you have two different ways you can do it. One, you can pick this option. I have gas heating and I have an air conditioner, and everything is going to be documented on one line. The other option is to pick gas furnace as one line item and then add to it what's going on the AC side, unitary AC. Both are appropriate. So that has been a big question. Feel free to use the furnace plus AC if you want to do it one way, but you're always allowed to break it out into one line item for heating, one line item for cooling, if that just makes it easier. And honestly, I find it that way is the way I do it, but you have the furnace plus AC if you so desire. In our particular situation, we have a variable refrigerant flow system. I didn't have to think too hard. It matched up nicely. Shock. I wonder why Gina chose to document that particular system type. So here's all those system types I just was talking about that we have available. Here's that subcategory. I have to pick which type of variable refrigerant flow system I have. I have a heat pump air-cooled system. And I have to indicate my sizing. Am I choosing the smallest size available to meet the load? Now we'll see that there are some exceptions, and you might be like, oh, I can't read all the exceptions. This is so hard. Hover, hover, hover patiently. And then this little yellow box will pop up and give you the entire sentence that's there. There was just apparently, this is what I'm being told, they couldn't fit all the words in there. I don't know. I think they could have used a smaller type. Yeah, they love my
tiny type.
tiny type. Then you need you need to have a magnifying glass when you do this work. And then we continue to fill out what is the sizing. Because guess what? Sizing is prescriptively defined as meeting the load with just some small considerations to safety loads. And it's a 21% safety load for cooling, and I got to tell you, I forget what it is for heating. And the form is making sure you're within the prescriptive allowances for sizing. And it only knows that because, one, you're putting in the heating output. What is your designed output for the heating system? But then I also want to know what is the rated output of the system per the manufacturers. And I got to tell you, every equipment schedule I've seen provides this information. Do I have any supplementary heat? I don't, so I'm leaving it at 0. 0 is an allowed input for almost all of these. So don't think 0 means it's wrong. It just means that you don't either have that particular feature or it really truly is 0. But make sure you're using 0 when you want to use 0 and it's not a typo. I've got my cooling output. I got my sensible per design and then also what it's rated by the manufacturer. And then here I have my load calculations. And this needs to be backed up, right, Sally? Where am I getting my load calculation numbers?
Well, usually the design engineer is doing the load calcs, either in the load calc software or on a separate calculation. And Gina, you'll see footnote 4 of this table says the authority having jurisdiction can ask for the load calcs to verify these numbers if they want to.
So don't make up numbers. That's not okay. Use real numbers and provide backup to how those numbers were achieved so that we can document we're using the appropriately sized equipment. Then this is a sub-table to Table F, and this is now determining the efficiency of the systems. So I'm going to pick different size categories. If you go to those tables and the standards in 110.2, you'll see they're broken out. Your efficiency requirements change based on equipment size. So do make sure you're picking the right range of output that's going to determine your efficiency requirements. Here I'm going to grab my rating condition for this particular type of equipment, and the form autofills what the minimum efficiency requirements are for heating versus cooling. And then I'm going to input what is designed, what's going to match up with what we're seeing on the equipment schedules in the drawings. And my efficiencies have to be equal or greater than what is indicated as what's required for minimum for Table C to say, yes, we're in compliance. So I had 2 things I had to show compliance for, sizing and efficiency in Table F. Now I'm going to go on and look at what's going on with fans and economizers. And remember, I clicked economizers even though I wasn't quite sure whether I needed it or not. And when we come to fan systems, we're looking at what are the fans per a zone. And typically my zone is determined by the mechanical equipment that's serving the zone. So I'm documenting all the fans. I am documenting the supply fans of my mechanical equipment, the exhaust fans, the return fans, and any transfer fans. All the fans, anything on that is on during peak load conditions has to be wrapped up into one table to show compliance to the wattage allowances. And you'll see how I have the ability to add a system. And what we really mean by system is you're adding your zonal systems so that you can capture all of the fans that are associated with that area of the building. So when I have a VRF system, what I'm showing compliance for now is my indoor units. The sizing and efficiencies based on the outdoor units. Here, my fan compliance and also my ventilation is about the indoor fans, and that's also where I'm looking for my economizers. And I look and I see one of the options here is that economizers are not applicable if my cooling systems are not equal or greater than 54,000 BTU of cooling. Well, remember, I had 2-ton pieces of equipment. All of them were less than 54,000 BTU of cooling. And that's each piece of equipment, by the way. It's not all of them combined. It's equipment piece by equipment piece that I'm looking for. And because economizers were not required, the economizer controls do not have to be documented. If I had economizers, I'd have to document controls, but the form's letting me know, don't worry about it because it's grayed out. I have a variable air volume system versus a constant volume, and again, I am modeling all my fans that are associated with this system. And this can become a lengthy particular table if I have a lot of different sized VAV boxes. Let's say we have 100 VAV boxes, but they're 10 different sizes. You're only going to show 10 different VAV boxes and use multipliers. Here, column 3 is all about multipliers. I have 10 indoor 2-ton systems, so I get to document them all on one line item. You do have to indicate whether it's brake horsepower or nameplate horsepower. Fractional horsepower doesn't have a place at all with the energy code. So mechanical engineers in the room, don't just put FHP in the drawing sets and the schedule and think you're done. You have to provide the brake horsepower or the watts. Watts, and then for the form, you got to convert them to horsepower. We have fan power pressure drop adjustments. What are these all about in this code cycle, Sally?
You know, these are brand new for the 2019 code cycle. So if you want to read the code language, you can click on this hyperlink and look at this table. So basically, there's all these different options that can give you adjustments for filtration devices. And the adjustments are all different based on what you've chosen. So the form already has the numbers built in. You choose what kind of device you have here in this drop-down, and then it makes the adjustment for you.
I have to say the fully ducted return and exhaust is the most popular choice, and you'd be amazed at the difference it makes in being able to show compliance to your fan numbers, because the code changed the fan minimums, the fan brake horsepower minimums, and how we show compliance when we've triggered the need to show compliance. Anytime we have over 5 brake horsepower of a fan system, remember that's all of them, in a zone, we have triggered the need to show compliance to our brake horsepower energy requirements. And the table is keeping track of it. Here it's saying, so far what you put in here, your brake horsepower number is 7, and you are good to go as long as you don't exceed 7.8. I am less than 7.8, so I am good to go. This is inappropriate. This is showing compliance. If it was greater than, then that table C would say no. But it is equal or less than, so the table says yes. Yay, I'm going to move on to my controls. Now there's a lot of controls, and sometimes it seems almost overly simplistic because it's all in one line, and some of these tables go on, but there's a lot going on here. Sally, do we have any tips and tricks here on how to go about determining the best way to show compliance for controls? Where am I going to find this control data? How do I know it's meeting the design?
Well, the drop-downs are giving some clues because these are sort of the typical ways that shut-off controls are met. And then in addition to that, all of these not applicable choices are really exceptions in the code requirements. So the exceptions are already built in here. And if you really need to go look at the code requirements and read, let's say, you know, this is just a shortened version of what the requirement is in the code. But if you want to go to the code and read the full exception or the full drop-down, you can. Click on this hyperlink. It's going to take you through to the Energy Commission's PDF of the standards. It'll take you to the page that 140.4 in is on, so it won't take you directly to in. So you may have to scroll down to find in, but it will take you to the appropriate page. So use the hyperlink.
Use the hyperlinks, and I have to say I do all the time. Like here for column 7, I got to tell you, I sat here for a while going, DRT stats. What the heck are DRT stats? And as soon as I went and looked at the code section, oh, demand response thermostat. So sometimes I have to go and look up just to see what do they mean by some of these abbreviations. I'm in compliance. I'm going to go on to Table J. Table J is a beast. Table J, potentially, think of how many, this is, what are your ventilation requirements for every unique space type? And if I've got a large building, this could be pages and pages and pages. And we are definitely finding that the mechanical form is not documenting with less pages than the 2016 static forms. It's dramatically more. In fact, it's in par with the number of pages typically used in the performance approach because the same things are being documented. You'll find that a lot of these tables look and feel a lot like how you're seeing this information documented in the performance form. Sally, do you think any of that was on purpose?
That was absolutely on purpose. In fact, we heard from plans examiners that it would be really useful to see consistency in the table structures between the performance and prescriptive and mandatory forms. So we worked with the Energy Commission to do that as much as possible.
In fact, you're going to start seeing the performance form look a little different and look a little bit more like these new dynamic forms in terms of table names and the lettering. You have the option with this table because it can be pretty beefy, and let's say you do all of your ventilation calculations separately. You don't want to do it here in the form. You've got your own method that you use. You have a choice here in line 1. Check the box if you're showing ventilation calculations instead of using this table. So you're going to go ahead and click the box, and then you're going to attach whatever it is that is showing compliance for ventilation. But I'm going to go ahead and use the form because I actually really like the logic that's integrated in the form. I'm going to do my system name. So this is another one in which I'm breaking it down by system. If you have 10 different unique systems, you're going to keep adding until you have 10 unique different systems. If you have 10 systems that are identical, you probably want just to say one system times 10 because of the fact that we're really looking at the unique outside air CFM airflow associated with your systems and how they may play into your control requirements. Here that's integrated on the table. You're going to indicate any transfer air that might be associated with your systems. Be aware there are new transfer air requirements of the 2019 code about what class of air can transfer to a different class of air. We have new air filtration requirements under this code, MERV 13 filter requirements. That's supported here on the form. And then I have my different space types because remember, space type dictates my outside air requirements of the energy code. And these have changed quite a bit in this code cycle. Expect the occupancy type names to be different than they were in 2016, and definitely expect the CFM requirements to look a lot different than they did in the 2016 code cycle. I am going to be putting in my square footage associated with this unique space type. And what's also new to this code cycle, Sally, is this exhaust air requirement. How does this form support exhaust air?
Yeah, it's just another column here. So we've got the exhaust ventilation, and again, that's already put in here based on the occupancy type that you're choosing as well.
So a lot is going on here. Do make sure that you are documenting correctly what's going on with your demand control ventilation system, your CO2 sensors, and the occupancy sensor requirements. These occupancy sensor requirements for ventilation are not new. I'm just finding people really didn't understand them. There's a lot new clarification that's been provided about the ventilation controls in the latest blueprint. That's a quarterly newsletter provided by the Energy Commission. You guys might want to get your hands on if you want to know more about those occupancy sensor controls. So here the form is telling me my total CFM outside air requirement is 2,300 CFM. As long as my designed outside air is equal or greater than that, the form is going to say that I am in compliance. This then goes back and speaks to Table C so that it can say, yes, ventilation is in compliance. Distribution, duct testing is not truly understood by a lot of people. And Sally, walk us through the logic that was baked into these forms about helping people understand HERS duct testing.
Yeah, so if in Table B you say that ductwork is part of your project scope, then it's going to expand the duct leakage ceiling subtable within Table L. And really what you do is you're going to put in each duct system, so you'll name it here. You can add duct systems using this button down here. And then you answer these questions, all yes or no drop downs, 11 through 17. And based on the way you answer, the form's going to tell you if the duct leakage testing is triggered for that specific duct system. And then as we talked about earlier, the NRCC, the first form that's associated with duct leakage testing, will move from no to yes based on this answer here. So if you have any duct systems that do have a yes here and require the leakage testing, that NRCC table will also reflect that.
So I've done all this. This table is speaking back to my table C. Yay, I'm in compliance. So I'm going to go back and kind of see, well, where am I? So I go back to table C and I'm like, what? Why is it still saying does not comply? So we're going to troubleshoot. It's telling me something's happening with table F, and there's something about some table Q. I don't even know what the heck it's talking about. Let's go look and see. I go to table D to see what it's telling me. It's saying I have an efficiency issue with table F. I go to table F. This is all about the sizing. Here's the efficiency. Well, gosh dang it, I could have sworn I filled in column 9 with my design efficiency, but that's not working. It's not here. There is a known bug that when you save and close the form and open it back up in a dynamic form, these efficiencies seem to disappear. It is going to be fixed, and we'll see that really soon in terms of a bug fix. I just go ahead and fill in that efficiency again, and then my table is looking much better. But I still need to deal with table Q. Sally, talk to them a little bit about what table Q is about and the 2 different ways you can use it.
Yeah, table Q in the mechanical form is really documenting mandatory measures that aren't documented in other tables already in the form. So there's a couple ways to complete this. The first is it's asking you if you're using a mandatory measure note block. And if you say yes, I'm going to use a mandatory measure note block, then you put in here where you're using a mandatory measure note block. So where can the plans examiner find that? What's the sheet number? If you're not going to use a mandatory measure note block, then you would answer no to this first question. This grays out. And the table expands to include all of these mandatory measures. And so what this is asking you to do is say, okay, where is that mandatory measure documented within the plan set? Now, the compliance up here in Table C is based on Table Q being completely filled out. So even if this mandatory measure is not applicable to your project scope, you do need to put an NA over here in order for Table C to say complies. That is explained in the table instructions, but we know how people do miss instructions, so I do recommend you look at the table instructions and it'll give you hints like that. So if you leave that blank, you're still going to see Table Q does not comply.
Every word put on these forms was a committee decision, I got to tell you, whether that word could be on the form. Do we have enough room for it? Is it going to make the forms longer? Does it have value? So honestly, do read every single word on these forms because they're there for a very important reason. They were found that they were needed to get people to be successful. Okay, I'm still going to keep looking through the rest of my form. I know Table C complies, but I'm not quite done yet. I'm going to quickly glance through and make sure all the tables that I think I should be doing are being done. I have my installation forms. I'm going to double check that looks right. I'm going to look at my acceptance forms. And when I look at my acceptance forms, I'm like, wait a minute. I'm not a multifamily building. Why is that saying yes? So I'm going to go ahead and change it to no. But remember, it's going to say in Table D, hey, someone changed something in O. Have them tell you why. And so I wrote in, I don't need that form because I'm not a multifamily occupancy. Again, this is a known little bug that will be fixed very soon. Good reasons to keep downloading the most current version. Feeling good with what's going on with those verification forms because I figured out I don't need duct leakage and I don't have any of these other requirements because I'm not multifamily. I'm going to do a digital signature for my signature, But guess what? I am not going to give my client a dynamic form that can be changed once I've signed it. So I always print to PDF to lock it in as a static form before I send it to my client for them to review it, make sure they agree with it, and that their design supports what we established as a compliant pathway for them to sign and then integrate into their design set. Now, I would love to get a show of hands here in the room who is also really interested in knowing about the envelope form. Who has a keen interest in the envelope form? Could you raise your hand? Okay. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly and basically really show you some of the features that are really great to know about with the other forms, such as electrical distribution and lighting, because I know we have a couple of electrical engineers in the room. So this is an alteration. I have a lot of existing features that I'm adding, changing, removing, and I need to make sure that's reflected appropriately in Table B. And remember, envelope occupancy does matter, so make sure you pick the right one. And I don't have any new construction, because this is an existing building. I'm not adding on to the building, but I definitely have an alteration. And there's a little trick to know that when you have a re-roof, you have to look at both roof assembly and roofing material. And then I am going to select every building feature that applies to my scope of work. I start off with roof, and what I pick here, and this is going to be the same for lighting and so many of the other forms, you have different choices. Like for lighting, I have track lighting, I have can lighting, I have pendant lighting. What you pick is going to subsequently open up different tables about how to document that particular building feature. I picked span deck, and so it's going to bring up what supports span deck in terms of my insulation requirements. Because this is an alteration, I have a nice exception associated with the fact I'm not going to move my mechanical equipment that's on that flat roof. I do need to always be providing occupancy. It could be a mixed occupancy building, so there's going to be a lot of repeat asking of what is the occupancy associated with this particular building feature. I'm looking back to Table C to make sure my roof assembly is good. And the same process is going to be in play for how I'm doing my roofing material. Every single one of these inputs on these forms is thought about carefully about whether it's needed or not to show compliance to the code requirements. If something wasn't needed, if we don't really need to know the slope of the roof, guess what? The form is not going to ask you about it. Don't assume the form is asking you something that's frivolous, because that is really not the case. Everything that's being asked is so it can determine the compliance pathway. Here we're doing the same thing with the walls. I've got framed walls. One of the things I love about the envelope form is it allows me to engage the area weighted approach, because code doesn't require that every single opaque surface meet a minimum U factor. I have to meet the overall weighted average of the U factors that I can blend in under the hood. It's kind of like a little mini performance approach that I get to do for my opaque assemblies. Every assembly type, and you're going to see this, every mechanical equipment type, lighting type, whether it's new, altered, or in here, especially if it's demising, every different surface type, every different type of lighting is going to make a difference on how the form is going to ask you about those features. And with fenestration, I always use the area weighted approach. I didn't used to, because the old forms, I had to do a whole different other form, and I never could figure out how to fill it out right. I had to use Energy Pro to fill it out because I couldn't figure it out on my own. And it was someone in my office, Marina, showed me, Gina, you know, you could have showed compliance and not had them change their window product if you had used the area weighted approach. And I felt horrible that I had a client change something they didn't have to just because I didn't know how to use a method. And here it's pointing out to me that I have an issue just with my solar heat gain coefficient. That's what I also like with these forms. As you've been seeing, it directs us exactly to where the issue is. It's not just going to say you have an issue with windows. It's going to say you have an issue with the efficiency of the window, with the area of the window. The forms really try hard to give you guidance that allows you to use your time wisely in figuring out what's going on. So we are going to skip this right now, and we're going to move forward a little bit here to where you can go to get help after today. So Energy Code has a lot under its hood. I don't know if you've checked out everything on our website lately, but we have updated so much stuff for the 2019 code, and we have new stuff, like Sally was just introducing to you guys, the Forms ACE. And yes, we had Forms ACE before, but now it's a whole new game, Forms ACE, in terms of how it's helping the industry. So check out, if there was something you checked out in the past, you might want to check it out again and see how it might have evolved. We have many things that evolve on our website. One of the things that's still slowly evolving is updating our training. We do have a series of online self-studies. You do these all by yourself. You could stop and start. You can do them as many times as you want. And we have one on how to fill out these dynamic forms for the 2016 code. Sally, why are we still telling them that this is a good tool?
Well, there's really two reasons. One is because of our training team is moving all of the in-person training that Energy Code provides over to online training. So this is the update of this is getting delayed a little bit. But to be honest, 99% of the content in this 2016 online self-study is still valid. So even if some of the technical stuff in the forms have changed, this training really covers, features and how to use the forms and what the benefits are and that kind of stuff, which is really pretty consistent.
There is also a series supported through Energy Code on YouTube. I got to tell you, I'm not a huge YouTube user, and my kids think I'm pathetic. But there is a YouTube channel that we have that's hosted by Brian Selby of our team, and it's a Code and Coffee series. And he's going to be doing recordings of him with a real project live, filling out the forms. He's going to do 10 recordings, one for each of these forms, showing how alive, hey, where do I find the information to fill this out? What do I do if I'm having an issue or a problem, like I forgot to fill out a previous table? They're real scenarios. They're not like today where I got to be able to pull out of my can exactly what I wanted to show you. I bet you're still going to have questions after today. So I also want to make sure that you're aware of the fact that you can submit a question through Energy Code. You can either submit a question this way or submit it directly to info@energycodeace.com is the email address actually this gets sent to. I have to say, I think I answer 90% of these questions. Sally answers about 9% of these questions, and we have some people who answer the other 1%. And we're pretty fast in turning around our ability to answer your questions. The only time sometimes it's a little slow is if we're traveling. But we're not traveling right now. So we're here for you. Use us. Let us help you out. We are online almost 24 hours a day. Who's also here for you is the hotline staff. And actually, the hotline staff, that most of the Energy Commission, they've been working from home. So they've also been supporting answering the hotline number and the email, and they've been doing it from home. I think that's so amazing. So do feel free to reach out to the hotline staff. Like I said earlier, they really up their game in being able to help the common issues that are happening with the forms. But I also want to make sure that I put out there that you guys have to be nice to them. We have heard reports of people getting frustrated with these forms and kind of taking it out on the CEC hotline staff. Please be nice to them. They're there for you, the same as we are. Ask us before you get upset. Ask the hotline before you get upset. Don't pull up one of these forms and expect to get it done in an hour and go into the building department to submit later that day. That's not thinking clearly the best way to support yourself to be successful. We are going to be asking you to take a survey more than once. You only have to take it once, but it's just so important we ask you multiple times because it's how we prove the CPUC we're using your ratepayer funds correctly and that you feel this is useful to the industry. And let's talk about how we're going to give you your certificate of participation. So all of you who are still with me, thank you very much, are going to get a certificate automatically sent to you. Do give us a couple of weeks. It's not automatic. When you leave me today, it's not going to be in your email box within 20 minutes. This is real people doing it. It's not automated. I'm assuming none of you attended as a group. That is a popular method when we don't have a shelter in place. So I'm assuming all of you were all by yourselves and not within 6 feet of someone else next to you. So I'm not going to worry about groups right now. Here is Sally and I's contact information. We are there for you. We want to answer the questions you have after today. We are supported to help you and answer your questions. We are better via email, though, I have to say, than we are getting us by phone. Catherine and her team are my technical crew. Daryl and Bruce are here with all of our sessions, and they make sure it goes smoothly. Didn't this go smoothly, guys? Wasn't this amazing? How many of you, thank you, Betsy, how many of you have been on online sessions in the last 3 weeks that were a pretty scary event? That was not here today. I'm going to say yet again, the hotline is always there for you. Jill Marver is our manager for the Decoding Talk series at PG&E. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or even if you want to tell her how great we're doing, do feel free to reach out to her directly. Okay, what we want to spend time now is asking you, and we're actually going to unmute all of you. So Daryl, let's go ahead and unmute people. Be aware, I'm unmuting you. Are there any questions we didn't get to? Is there anything you want us to show you that you haven't seen yet? How can we make you happy today? Anyone? Hey, Dale, I told you I was going to ask you at the end of this. What do you think of these forms now that we've gone through them with you?
Well, I think they're awesome. I think it's, I really like I like YouTube, so I think the guy filling the forms out on YouTube and showing how that's done will be a plus, definitely. It's one of those things where we do, from a jurisdiction point of view, we do everything, and energy is a small portion of that, so we don't get as much work on it as we should and should know about it. So, but this is good. This is good. I enjoyed it.
Yay, thank you. Does anyone else have a question or a comment they'd like to add? Because if not, I'm going to let you guys go.
We're good, thanks.
Okay, yay, a person. Thank you. Okay, you guys have a great rest of your Wednesday. That's what day it is today. Are all of you guys also losing track of what day it is?
Yeah.
It's Wednesday.
Yep.
It's the end of the day. And you guys have a great rest of shelter in place. Please, all of you, stay safe. And Sally, I know I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you both.
Yeah, everyone.
Awesome.
Stay
Thank
safe,
you, guys.
Everybody.
Thank
Okay,
you.
have a good one.